Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm John Kennedy.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And today's passage is the parable of the 10 bridesmaids from the Gospel of Matthew. And in it, I almost get the sense that Jesus is working with our oil suppliers, like Standard Oil or something, because his message seems to be never run out of oil. But there are some other things he might be trying to communicate here. So let's see what he has to say. This is Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight, there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." Okay.
Well, I think we're getting, we're here at Matthew 25, we're getting away from a certain type of parable and into these parables of judgment, like, last judgment, and that's that kind of apocalyptic overtone. And I know there are many ways to read this, but in terms of Matthew's gospel, it's coming to the crisis point, and we've shifted from Jesus speaking to Pharisees and those challenging him to now he's speaking directly to the disciples. Yes. And he's speaking privately to them, kind of, I think, teaching them in response to their question, which before this passage is, "Lord, what will the sign of your coming be at the end of the age?"
Yes.
So it's interesting. It's a real big shift and seriously convicting teaching.
It is. It really is. Yeah. It's so good to note that we're in a different place now in the story than when we were last looking at Matthew a couple Sundays ago, because we're skipping our journey through Matthew to observe All Saints. But when we last were looking at this general section of Matthew, his ministry in Jerusalem during Holy Week, he's dealing with the Pharisees, as you said, and now he's turned his attention to his disciples, and he's telling these parables of judgment. And there's so many questions that this raises, not least what oil dealer is open and selling oil at midnight?
Right.
But apparently in the Middle East today, there are wedding customs in some places that are similar to this, where you'll have a torchlight procession late in the evening.
Oh, wow.
And with several stages. So the bridegroom might be delayed at some point. Everybody wants to talk to the bridegroom.
Right,
so.
right. And it's a days-long feast, right?
Okay,
I think so. They sort of go and pick up all the various parts of the wedding party. Yeah. Is that how this works?
I think so. Yeah. So that at least is rooted in reality, even if I don't know, maybe the oil dealer would be open if there was a wedding. Yeah. But anyway, there are more interesting things to explore. Like you said, this has in view last things and the coming of the Son of Man, or the second coming, from the Greek word parousia, which means coming. And in the disciples' question to him that sets all this up it's interesting. It's possible to read them as asking about two things: the sign of your coming and of the end of the age.
Yeah.
And it's possible to see those as distinct, related events. And I was reading one commentator say that while this, more than likely has a future reference point, equally, it could be talking about the reality of Jesus's ministry and how people have received him. That Jesus, as the bridegroom, as the Messiah, has come to the people of God, and they're sort of sorted into wise and foolish based on how they responded to him.
Right.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, there's so many interesting symbolic motifs in here. We've got the bridegroom, as you mentioned, that's a classic analogy of the Son of Man and of Israel, that God is the bridegroom and Israel is the virgin bride, and, being prepared to be presented to the bridegroom. And we've got lamps, which is always a sign of, a symbol of wisdom, and oil in the lamp being the kind of longing for wisdom that fuels the finding of the wisdom. And we've got being awake and falling asleep, this idea of being ready or not. And I think in this story, all of them do fall asleep, and there's like a dual meaning here that, you can even be wakeful while you're asleep, and the ones who are ready and wise are prepared even when they're sleeping, when the knock comes at the door. So I like this idea that I read about, that the foolishness here represents the wisdom of the world, to be relying on the things that you can see and basing your actions on things that can be predicted or likely, calculating kind of wisdom that, they came with full lamps. They weren't stupid. They were banking on the bridegroom coming on time, and, they're invited to the wedding. So they have their invitation. It's not like they're not part of the wedding already.
Right.
They just haven't prepared for all the impossibilities, And the wisdom here represents faith in the unseen, the unknowable, and they don't know the bridegroom, and they haven't seen him yet, and they're just prepared for any contingency. And so I think Jesus is, by teaching his disciples privately this way, he's literally preparing them for what is to come. And even though we read it at our distance with this end times kind of, it's easy to read it as a kind of end of the world reading, but and maybe Jesus meant it that way, or Matthew meant it that way, but it also works right within the story where Jesus is about to be handed over at midnight in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's preparing them to keep awake. And, we know that in the garden, he says to them, can you please keep awake with me 1 hour and pray? And sure enough, at midnight, they come to take Jesus and hand him over.
Yeah.
So James Allison talks beautifully about how Peter becomes the one that will be our example of playing out, working out this story, that he tries to go in with Jesus into Pilate's courtyard, and he is not prepared to testify to Jesus, and immediately denies him, and immediately says, I never knew him, and I swear I don't know that guy.
Wow.
It's really fascinating. And so it's in a graceful way, a merciful way. It's sort of like we get to see Peter having just heard this story and flail around. He doesn't have the oil in his lamp, so in that reading of it, this teaching can be about how the oil is our ability to see, our ability to be prepared to recognize the bridegroom, even when it looks like the one being handed over to his death.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the grand teaching of Matthew, is that the kingdom of heaven is for the ones who are being handed over and victimized. And, the gospel is teaching us to stand on the side of those who are being cast out by the world, and stand on the side of the people who are victims of violence and ostracization and marginalization everywhere. And Jesus is the epitome of that. And, Peter was afraid to stand with him and to identify with him when he was being handed over to death, because his Messiah wasn't going to look like that. So the one who's like coming to save us is the one who's coming to die.
Yeah.
And it's not quite the same as the heroic bridegroom on his steed, but it still ushers us into the grand celebration of the kingdom of heaven. I mean, that's not the end of the story, that handing over to death, but it's where we're meant to be watching. It's what we're meant to be watching for, is where are we going to recognize God in this world?
Yeah.
And with what eyes are we going to see that?
Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty interesting reading. That stays right in Matthew and has a very razor sharp edge to it.
It does. I really love that that connection. I've never thought about that, and it is one example of others I was thinking about, of how elegantly Matthew is composed and how it has these inner resonances. It's all sort of like hyperlinked.
Right.
And
he's a total genius.
Yeah, it is, especially just knowing, the technical means they had to compose in those days. Like, you couldn't, like,
cut and paste.
There's no word processor, no Control F at all. Very limited means to think about all this and write it down. So just fascinating and so impressive. But among others that I did, note in preparing for this are, well, first of all, you've mentioned the wisdom piece of this, and this is clearly resonating with Old Testament wisdom literature, specifically with the book of Proverbs, where wisdom and folly are personified as two different women, which obviously lends itself very, very naturally to the five wise bridesmaids and the five foolish bridesmaids in this story. And so that's one thing. And then Jesus talks about wisdom earlier in Matthew. He says, everybody who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man, let's say wise person, who builds their house on rock. Everyone who hears these words and does not act on them will be like a foolish person who builds their house on sand. And then also we get this language of, Lord, Lord, like, let me in, or Lord, Lord, I don't you know me? And later so sorry, I didn't say that earlier passage from Matthew I just referenced is from the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 7.
Yeah.
And also in 7 we get, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom, but only those who do the will of God. Which is a tough teaching that maybe we can unpack a little bit, but nonetheless, I think illuminates a little bit of what it means to be ready. To act in accord with God, and I might say to sort of like be in accord with God. And another thing we're talking about, like what it means to watch for Jesus or for God, and you were talking, I think, really correctly about looking for being prepared to see God in people and in circumstances that we're often not sort of trained to. I mean, obviously in our culture today, we're not trained to look for God at all.
Right.
But to look for what's ultimate, or look for what will save us, right? We do look for those, usually misguidedly. And so you were talking about, in the victim, in the outcast, and so on, and our salvation is in solidarity and attention to them. But another thing, I should say, and another place where God moves and is present, where Christ is present, is in our souls. And so turning again to this book that I mentioned before, and that Rob put a graphic to, I saw the Kingdom Within by John Sanford, who is a priest and Jungian analyst. He talks about this as a sort of an allegory for the movement of the inner dynamics of our being, of our soul, and how Christ often comes to us in unexpected ways at unexpected times, and that there is this union that is meant to take place in every soul between between opposites. There are also so many opposites within us, and from a Jungian or depth psychology point of view, part of the reason for the inner conflict and disquiet that so many of us experience is that we are not integrated. We have all these elements of our personality. We have aggression, we have gentleness, and so on, and we just don't know how to put it all together.
Right.
And what we need to be whole and to enter the wedding banquet, to enter the kingdom, is to integrate. To take everything that we cast consciously or not into the shadows and bring it into the light, and so part of what we need to really see this union through is to be awake, to be conscious. And so the oil, the lamps can be, in this case, a symbol for consciousness, sort of like our conscious attention to the inner life, sort of attending that process, which is ultimately, certainly from a Christian point of view, the work of Christ. Jung himself likened the true center of our personality to Christ. Yeah. Which I think is very powerful.
Right. Yeah, I really appreciate that approach and the perspective. And I think in the same vein, the foolish and wise virgins or bridesmaids, they represent two parts of our inner life. We're both foolish and wise at any given moment. And, when we're cultivating that inner awakening, we can be prepared for life's shifting ground. And, life is filled with surprises and crises and the unexpected. And every contemplative practice invites you into exercising the muscle of awakeness and being prepared and taking whatever comes, absorbing whatever comes, and accepting it for what it is, looking at it with some distance, being able to respond wisely and calmly, without getting completely tossed by the chaos of life. You have to do that on a daily or regular basis in order to be prepared. And so it's not like, you store it away in the cupboard and pull it out when you need it.
Totally.
It's something we practice all the time. So I really do appreciate that. This teaching, this parable fits squarely into a classic wisdom school. And it's funny because usually the ones that are the most jarring to read do fit into that. When read from the wisdom standpoint, they become this really beautiful, rich, encouraging passage, where it's just prodding us forward in our practices of looking for wisdom and acquiring wisdom, and the contemplative life that really is. Even the phrase contemplative life sounds so foolish, it's like, oh, you're just sitting around gazing at the trees. And, it sounds like that to people who aren't familiar with it. But in fact, it's the most, I don't know, it's a very disciplined life to cultivate stillness and inner calm and all that stuff. And I picked up on this reading from Wisdom because our lectionary, we have two options in our lectionaries, but our listeners may not know, but we choose track 1. But the track 2 option gives the reading from Wisdom 6. And I looked it up just because I love the book of Wisdom, which is a little underrated in our practice,
a deep cut, but it was such a good book.
And it's as named, all about wisdom personified. And in it, this reading says, she, otherwise known as Wisdom, hastens to make herself known in anticipation of their desire. Whoever watches for her at dawn shall not be disappointed, for he shall find her sitting by his gate. Because she makes her rounds, seeking those worthy of her, and graciously appears to them in the ways and meets them with all solicitude. The idea that wisdom is lurking everywhere. It's readily available to us. And it's really the looking, it's the kind of hunger for wisdom that invites it in. And I really like that idea.
Oh yeah, I love that.
So these so-called wise bridesmaids, they sound so mean, there's not enough for you and for us, go buy your own. It sounds so snotty, right? But in fact, it can't be given away, this kind of inner wisdom.
It's not that kind of thing.
Yeah, one has to acquire it for themselves. And that's the other part of the wisdom school teaching is like, it's something you really it's within us all
Yeah.
to be awakened and cultivated, and you can't give it away even if you wanted to.
Totally. Yeah.
So
Yeah. The
and
Buddha,
you can't get it from someone else.
right.
Sorry.
The Buddha said, I can't, paraphrasing, but like, I can't give you what I have. I can only tell you about it.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do the work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that applies here. There is this question of like, when, if ever, is it too late to get it, and to therefore to experience the wedding banquet, to be I don't know, if you will, like enfolded in the embrace of wisdom of Christ that is lurking everywhere, as you said, and calling to us at all times, or seemingly at certain times, especially clearly. Like crises, as you said, I think, are one of the key ways that's like, oh, something is calling for my attention here. But is it ever too late? And because obviously, as this parable reads, like, it seems that perhaps it is too late at a certain point. And of course, as we talked about at the beginning, the most basic reference point for this is the coming of the Son of Man, whether that is his coming among God's people during the earthly life of Jesus, or his coming in the death and resurrection, or the destruction of Jerusalem, or at the end of the age, probably like all of it.
Right.
But also we're talking about the inner life here as well. And in the Sanford book, he suggests that if you set about the path of inner discovery and seeking this inward unification and wholeness that can be likened to entering the kingdom of heaven, even if you start late in life, like, it's okay. Like, right. For example, I've done some dream work in my life, and I've gone through long periods of time of not paying attention to my dreams. I've gone through much shorter periods of times of continuing to pay attention to my dreams. But if you look at dreams as messages from the unconscious, they keep coming,
Right.
And so I think that's a testament to the power and the creativity of our inner world, that it will keep communicating with us. So if we turn to it, even if you feel like, oh man, I'm old and like I haven't really done this stuff. Am I one of the foolish bridesmaids? Am I shut out? Sanford, who did this work with a lot of people, said that no, the people for whom it is really too late are those who have, as he puts it, languished so long in unconsciousness that the personality is just sort of solidified and rigid, and they would never really seek to begin this work anyway. So that's not such good news for people in that situation, but good news for anybody who has an inner hunger to seek this out. And there's so much more we can say about this, but we're getting the wrap-up sign. Do you want to?
Yeah, just one quick word, and I know we'll wrap up, but I like the idea that, it is too late, and it's never too late. But in life, we miss chances.
Yes,
like
right.
Like the Peter story. If he had been awake, how would the story have changed if he didn't deny Jesus and was ready to stand by his side or whatever? And I'm remembering the sermon Dean Robert gave a few weeks ago when he was here from Canterbury. Yeah. And he talked about God, continually returning to invite us into our vocation or into our true lives and true selves. And we can pass by every invitation. Yeah. Eventually we'll die, yes, right. It will be too late. But
too late then.
Yeah, but I think in an individual life, there's daily opportunity to be awake or be asleep, to have the lamp lit or not. And so the sooner we really open our eyes and acquire that wisdom and let God show us how to see, the more rich and the sooner we come into the kingdom, So anyway.
Beautifully said. I think that's a great final word. And please give us a call. Our number is 203-442-5002. That's 203-442-5002. You can leave us a voicemail. We love knowing who you are out there, and we love knowing that you're listening and what you think. Hopefully you kept awake during this podcast and will be ready for our next one. And we will look forward to seeing you then. So peace, blessings, and like, comment, and subscribe.
Thank you.